Evening, everyone. My name is Cynthia. I'm with the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance. Happy May Day. I don't know about you, but May Day is my favorite revolutionary holiday. I started as a youth organizer doing immigrant rights work and doing walkouts in 2006 for migrant rights. And we want to recognize that the labor struggle and the migrant rights struggle that mobilize so powerfully on these days. And we want to harness the power of this glorious, glorious day to wield social power towards building the world we deserve. So I'm gonna pass you to our comrades. But yeah, thank you for being here on May Day. It's an important sacrifice for a lot of us who might otherwise be in the streets chanting. And we hope that it is worth it. So let's do some organizing together.
Okay, I'm going to lower the mic. And I might need a pedestal. No, I'm kidding. Can you see me? Yes, you can see me. My name is Christine On, and I'm the founder and executive director of Women Cross DMZ, which is a global movement of women mobilizing for peace in Korea. And I am just so honored to see all these beautiful faces in this room and to just thank you for taking time to come and be together. So here it goes. Friends, comrades, revolutionaries, peace builders, and agitators, welcome to the inaugural Feminist Peace Summit. This conference on building a feminist peace was brought together by the Feminist Peace Initiative. This is a collaboration between Madre, Women Cross DMZ, and Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, and the Inclusive Global Leadership Institute, or initiative at the C Center here at the University of Denver. And over the past, woo, Marie Berry. And really, we've been planning this for over a year. And thanks to the support of so many incredible sponsors and supporters whom we are deeply grateful to. As organizers, we came together to unite around a shared commitment to reorient US policy away from militarism and endless wars towards one that advances justice, peace, and collective security. Now, could this be a more opportune time to be gathering or what? Yes. But this convening is generations in the making, and I cannot believe there are so many people here from so many walks of my life. Actually, it's so incredible. So many of the teachers that have taught me so much about militarism and from a gender perspective. But your work to dismantle militarism, confront authoritarian power grabs, support grassroots organizing, and build feminist peace laid the path that we are on together here today. This gathering is a call to action to strengthen our footing in this moment of historic militarization and this moment of radical and transformative political awakening, to take our next step together to reimagine security, peace, and liberation through feminist values of care, cooperation, and centering those most impacted. The ongoing genocide in Gaza, the invasion of Ukraine, the violence unleashed today against nonviolent student protesters, the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Sudan, a derailed peace process in Yemen, the unresolved Korean War are products of the same devotion to violence, militarism, patriarchy, and profit that stole indigenous lands, enslaved millions, occupied Iraq, tested nuclear weapons amongst indigenous communities from New Mexico and the Marshall Islands. I don't need to tell you this. We all know this. But let's be reminded, the US spends more than $1 trillion on war year after year, while we cannot afford to pay for the basics of a decent and good society, such as affordable health care, housing, education, affordable college tuitions, clean air, clean water. This endless investment in forever war doesn't just make the rest of the world feel secure. where we have 800 military bases dotting the globe. It robs us from achieving genuine human security at home. I'm going to pass it on to Diana.
Now I'm going to raise the mic a little bit. It's such a joy to be here with you all today. My name is Diana Dor, and I am with Madre. Madre is an international human rights organization and a feminist fund. And today we join together. It's an opportunity not only to talk about what we're against, some of the things that Christine was just naming, but what we're rising for together and how we will get there together. We've come together as activists, as academics, as policymakers, as philanthropists, allies, and more, knowing that we each have a role to play. This summit is an invitation for all of us to see ourselves in this work of transforming US policy, culture, and economy towards feminist justice. So in the coming days, what you can expect is that we'll have a chance to build together and envision together through plenaries like the one we're about to see, breakout workshops, art-based political education, and many other opportunities to build relationships and connections. We will uplift our calls to action and exchange lessons and strategies that we can each bring into our work as we move forward in the days ahead. And in all of this, we'll focus on urgent questions like, what does it mean for policy to be in alignment with and grounded in movements for peace and justice? How can we build popular power in our communities and transnationally to confront US war-making and militarism and work to repair historic harms? How can we articulate and create a vision of a feminist foreign policy for peace? So in this moment, we're coming together to share our grief, our anger, and our radical optimism that lives within us, and to transform it into strategy that can propel us to a better world. And I will pass to Kate.
How lucky am I to work with these people? My name's Kate Alexander. I work at Madre with Diana. And today, we know that the path to a better world requires all of us, the wisdom of our movement elders with the energy of our youth. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the student encampment and divestment movement, from Columbia to USC, to UT Dallas, to Denver University. Across this country, unarmed students are facing SWAT teams, tear gas, arrest, and other forms of militarized state violence on their campus because they are protesting against militarized state violence committed in Gaza. The backdrop of this conference is that war criminals are still creating our policy while students are shackled by our state. As militarism multiplies to defend itself, we are reminded we protect us through both emergency response and long-term culture, policy, and systems change. In our work, each of us, we boldly show every day in the most challenging context in the world that a better world with justice, liberation, care, and peace is possible. The adamance of that vision is what builds our power. The community that shares that vision is what propels us forward and calls us here. Together, we call movement actors around the world towards a transformative feminist vision of peace, security, and liberation for Palestine, Yemen, Iraq, Iran, Korea, Afghanistan, and for all of us. In the United States, we are at a moment of radical transformation as more people awaken to the devastating impacts of US militarism abroad and at home, and the urgent need for US social movements to work in solidarity with global movement partners to usher in a new era. And this work is really hard. Angela Davis told us, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. That is what we are here in the darkest of times to do, to remind one another that a better world is possible, to be the beam of light in this darkness that illuminates our shared vision of feminist peace, care, and collective liberation. We are here together to protect each other, and we are here together to radically transform the world. And I'll pass it to Marie.
It is an honor to welcome you to engage in all of this work that my wonderful collaborators and comrades just shared with you at the Josef Korbel School and at the University of Denver, my home institution. I'm Marie Berry, for those of you who I don't know, and it's a real honor to welcome you all here. This institution, the University of Denver, was founded by people and systems implicated in the genocide of Native peoples and the theft and colonization of their land, a land that we now gather on. A land acknowledgement is an opportunity to recognize the Indigenous past, present, and future of a location, as well as an opportunity for us to continue confronting the dark legacy of dispossession and genocide against Native peoples today, and how we can engage today in genuine solidarity and action. We honor the original stewards of this land, the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute people.
I'll put the mic down. My name is Jessica Godinez. I'm from Movimiento Poder, which is formerly known as Padres y Jóvenes Unidos, who are very, very iconic out here in Denver, Colorado. I just wanted to share and ground us all right now in community and just share the movement prayer that we use in Latina and Chicana spaces here, and it's called Enloe. So basically, when we live with this mindset, we know that every action we take is out of the respect of life. It's us connecting to the world, to our surroundings, to each and every single one of us in this space. It's our ability to reground us and to allow us to feel. It's our ability to acknowledge one another. It's our reminder in this room that we are here and we're gonna talk about heavy stuff, but when we leave this space is what will bring us back and ground us in community. So I want us to do a call and response for Enloe. So I'll say the statement and then y'all could follow along with me. So Enloe. You are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. Enloe. 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 Thank you.
As we begin our opening plenary, I want to encourage all of you who are here to look at the most updated version or schedule of events, which is both in the programs that are available out there as well as downstairs, as well as via the QR codes that you're able to scan on your phones if you have them. And we, as many of my amazing collaborators have shared with you, we have a rich and full program over the next couple of days together. And I'm so honored and delighted, and it's with a lot of joy to welcome you to participate in all of it. After the plenary tonight, we will have a reception that you're all welcome to. We have a very famous DJ joining us, which I'll announce in a moment. And so it's going to be a lot of fun. Please, in the meantime, feel free to help yourself to food and to drinks and refreshments. There is water. If anyone missed the announcement that this whole summit is offering simultaneous translation into Spanish, please go ahead and see any of us in the back corner, or the folks in the back corner from the wonderful Community Language Cooperative. So we're very grateful for all of your support. Thank you for being here. If anyone has any other accessibility needs as well, I'd like to invite the members of my team here we call ourselves Team Denver. Denver team, raise your hands. We have Ashton, we have Carly, Avantika, Shannon, and Avantika is somewhere. It's also her birthday, so if you see her, please give her a huge hug and a lot of love. But those of us who just raised our hand, we're here to support for the next couple of days. So if there's anything we can do to make your time here more accessible, to make it better for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. So, and now, it is my great joy to thank my brilliant co-organizers, invite you to sit back down, and to invite our first brilliant panel and panelists to take the stage. Cynthia, Margo, and Toni, welcome. While these remarkable humans are making their way to the stage, I'll just tell you a little bit about them and encourage you to read more about them in the program that is online. The first person I'll introduce is Cynthia Enloe. Welcome, Cynthia. Cynthia is a research professor and at Clark University, and her career, her remarkable career, has spanned the globe. She's written more than 15 books, including books like Maneuvers, The International Politics of Militarizing Women's Lives, The Curious Feminist, and Bananas, Beaches, and Bases, which I know has a spot on nearly every syllabus in this Josef Korbel School of International Studies. She's received countless honors, and Cynthia, it is just a delight and a joy to have you here.
Thank you.
I want to also introduce Margo Okazawa Ray, also known as DJ More Love and Joy. Margo is a legendary activist and educator who's worked on issues of militarism, armed conflict, and violence against women intersectionally and internationally. She's the president of the board of the Association of Women's Rights and Development, or AWID, and was a founding member of the Combahee River Collective. We're so honored to have you here, Margo. Toni Haastrup is a remarkable human being and scholar. She's the professor and chair in global politics at the University of Manchester now. And she focuses on so many different things. Her work is so rich and so complex, and all of you should read it. It also has, all of these amazing academics and thinkers have produced so much I encourage you to dive into. Her work contributes to shaping policy about global politics, but with a particular attention to the intersections of gender, race, and power. And so, Toni, we're also so delighted to have you here today. And it's my great honor to be able to begin this summit with a couple of framing questions to all of you to help ground us in this moment, to help ground us in this time. We heard from the organizing team about the world that we're living in right now, the ongoing genocide and atrocities against Palestinians, the second year of the full-scale invasion of Russia and Ukraine, the militarization and the violence we've watched over the last 24 hours being directed at students on college campuses. And I'd love to invite perhaps you, Cynthia, to start us off by helping us understand the urgency of these questions about why a feminist peace matters and why it matters now in this moment.
First of all, thanks everybody for coming, and thanks Marie and her team. Have we given them all a thank you? I always think it's amazing we're all in a room together. Somebody has done work to bring us all here. I think it is an urgent time, but it's not a new time, right? People have gone through horrors before. That doesn't make them less horrible. It just means we should wonder how come we're going through them again, right? There have been horrors in the past. There have been horrors that have included women as victims, but also women as complicit. So the thing is to try and figure out, I think for me, what is it we didn't learn? What is it we refuse to learn? And when I say we, I mean not probably most of us here in the room, though it's amazing the things we don't learn, right? Or have to be retaught, or have to be taught for the first time because we missed it the first time. And so I have kind of, well, not kind of, I have a double, not mixed, because mixed sounds as though it's diluted, right? I have a double feeling about this moment. It's a moment of enormous urgency, but it is not the first time. And it is not the only times. We don't even know other places that are going through a kind of violence that's always riddled with misogyny. And we don't even have them on our list because we don't pay attention to those places because they haven't made the headlines yet. And that worries me. But it also worries me how we have forgotten what people have tried to teach us. They tried to teach us in 1919. Well, they tried to teach us in 1915 when the first Women's Peace Congress was held in The Hague, right? And we didn't learn. And then they tried to teach us again in 1945. Japanese women tried to teach us, right? What did we refuse to learn? I really want to think about that. And why is it that it is now so incumbent on us and urgent for us to think why we didn't learn the first time, why we refused to learn the first time? What is it that makes it so hard to learn hard lessons about preventing collective violence? What is it that allows us to tell stories that don't feel painful enough? So I think that's what the moment now feels like, Marie. It feels like a moment of being reflective about why we didn't learn the first time, why we didn't learn the second time, why we didn't learn the 33rd time, and what we're going to do differently now to learn what we've refused to learn before now.
Thank you, Cynthia. And I'm thinking so much about your latest book, which I didn't even mention, this 12 Feminist Lessons from War, and all of the lessons that you unpack in that book. It's just a remarkable book. So I'm excited to hear you speak more maybe about some of those lessons, because they are what we need to learn in these moments, so in so many ways. Margo, I'm wondering if I can ask you to ground us a bit next in the moment and in where you see the kind of urgency being rooted right now and the type of work that we need to be doing right now.
Thank you so much, everyone. And before I start, in addition to all the people who have been thanked, I have a personal thanks to folks who have made it possible for me to be here in this room with you all talking about this subject. And those are Anil Soon and Kim Yong-ja, who taught me about militarization of the Korean Peninsula. I'm thinking about Gwen Kirk, who got me sort of thinking in this way, who was part of the Greenham Common Women's Encampment, and the rest is history. I'm also thinking about Maha Abudaye, who invited me to Palestine in 2005, and that completely has changed my life. And also the Sisters of the International Women's Network Against Militarism, who were a volunteer group. We've been together since 1997, a ragtag group of people in the US and the Asia Pacific. And I'm mentioning those people because of my personal connection to them, but also, Cynthia, in answer to your question, it is from them and all the other related people who have given me the privilege to learn. And not just learn, but also ask different kinds of questions than I had been asking, up until that point. So I just want to acknowledge that. So right now, this moment is really important in so many ways. I want to start with two things. In the so-called global war on terrorism, the initial US invasion of Afghanistan began October 7, 2001. Why is that date and that invasion sitting in the dustbin, forgotten by all except Afghans most likely? And these are quotes. Every night, I have to decide whether to put on pajamas or something more solid. 100 meters away, 100 meters away, you can see your home but can't go home. How should I see my future and my children's future in a blockaded and unrecognized country? What are ways and tools for us to survive as a people on the verge of ethnic cleansing and verge of genocide? Who do you think spoke these words? They could have been Palestinian people in Gaza. They could have been women in Sudan. They could be in other places. But these words actually were spoken by Armenian feminists in talking about the Nagorno-Karabakh genocide that's happening, almost completed. Right? I want to ask you, since we're in a college setting, I have a little questionnaire for you. Mm-hmm. Actually, this was written by Wendell Berry. And here's the questionnaire. How much poison are you willing to eat for the success of the free market and global trade? Please name your preferred poisons. For the sake of goodness, how much evil are you willing to do? Fill in the following blanks with the names of all your favorite evils and acts of hatred. Number 3, what sacrifices are you prepared to make for culture and civilization? Please list the monuments, shrines, and works of art you would most willingly destroy. Number 4, in the name of patriotism and the flag, how much of our beloved land are you willing to desecrate? List in the following spaces the mountains, rivers, towns, farms you could most readily do without. And finally, state briefly the ideas, ideals, or hopes, the energy sources, the kinds of security for which you would kill a child. Please name, please, the children whom you would be willing to kill. Those questions for me answer the urgency of the moment. Beyond Gaza, beyond all the particular places we've named.
Ooh, Margo, thank you for that. Thank you for grounding us in that and with those questions, which I think resonate in a way that captures, I think, the grief that a lot of us are walking into this room with right now. Yeah. Thank you. I'm grateful for them. Toni.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and for Marie for having me on this august panel. So it's very difficult to follow two people who I've admired for most of my academic career. And I've been thinking a lot about that question as you were talking, why this moment? I guess for me, one of the reasons why this moment is I'm finally in a place where I know enough people and people know me enough to be able to do or say something about it to matter in my very small corner of the world. But I think in broader terms, at least thinking in terms of the work that I do, I think the big answer is that whatever we're doing right now is clearly not working. And for me, I found a lot of solace in feminist teachings, and feminist teachings towards liberation. So sort of moving on from the usual just add women and stare, and realizing, or at least being able to articulate why and how that is in feminist has been really important to my growth. But I think also we are in a moment where you have a really as a lot of the speakers have already mentioned, we've got the challenges of increased militarism and increased militarism as a default. So I completely agree with Cynthia that none of this is new. But I'm very troubled by the ease with which militarism is reached for. I never thought ever in my lifetime that after everything that happened in 2020, you will have a university president invite the militarized police on campus. And coming from the UK, it's very interesting to watch because as far as I'm concerned, they're simply taking lessons. One of the things we say a lot about is, this could have happened in the UK actually, because the president of Colombia had a similar role at the LSE up until last year. So where we sort of see a lot of these connections and solidarities, I think, definitely open up the space for feminist considerations. In addition to that, we sort of see a clear movement of anti-genderism, and it's manifesting in a lot of different ways, both domestically and internationally. And that relationship between the domestic and the international is quite interesting for me, because on the one hand, you've got this movement of anti-gender movement that is troubling, to say the least. In our context, it is this anti-gender movement that effectively pushed feminists out of Hungary. And they're ostensibly seeking solace in Austria, in Vienna, and I don't know how much of that they're actually getting. But another thing is also happening, because in the same time period, you've had a lot of feminist movements being much more visible, but also seeming to make a dent in state structures. And so we sort of see things like feminist foreign policy. We see a lot of civil society organizations trying to hold their governments to account to implement basic normative frameworks, global frameworks. So how do we try to make sense of this? I'm not quite sure yet, but I do think it's really interesting that these things are happening at the same time. It also raises the question of, if we do want this feminist peace and feminist future, what is the content of that feminist peace and feminist future? Particularly, I guess, in my context, again, looking at the ways in which feminism now seems to be making inroads within policy making. I will stop there for now.
I appreciate that so much. It reminds me that when Christine Ahn and I had a conversation, I don't know, maybe a year ago now, where we both were recognizing the impact of militarism and of war in our lives. Both my father was drafted and sent to Vietnam when he was 18. My grandfather fought in Korea, came back incredibly traumatized. There was cycles and cycles of violence that have permeated throughout my family, and Christine and I recognized that we shared in these ways different experiences and relationships to war. And we have been involved with so much feminist organizing for so long, and had been working in a lot of these conversations around feminist foreign policy and how do we build a feminist peace. But what we were not hearing enough of is that targeted, focused, anti-war, anti-militarist perspective. And what we were hoping we could try to sort of be in community with people to brainstorm is where we need to go. And so I just, in some ways want to reflect on that early conversation, because I think it helps us frame why we're here. And I know I am here eager to learn from you and each of you on this panel about where you think we should be putting our energy in this moment. Where is the fight? And what is the work we need to be together across academia, across activism, across policymaking, across philanthropy, across community members, across students? Where is the work, where is the energy that we should be cohering to really try to build.
Is that all? That's all she wants to know. Yeah, 2. But honestly, I think what is brilliant, I mean really brilliant about Christine and Marie and all of the team bringing us all together is that we're not one struggle. We're not one struggle. And I know you all think about this a lot, it's not one focus, right? None of us are smart enough to be able to take on the struggles for immigrant rights and the struggles against domestic violence and the struggles against militarized foreign policy all at once. What we need to do is have the respect for, the curiosity about each other's work and struggles, and enough to listen to each other. Because the really dangerous thing, but also what patriarchal militarizers the world over count on, is that we will silo our struggles. Because they, whoever they are, you know, whether it's Erdogan or Xi Jinping or whoever they are, they count on us not really having the breadth of curiosity and compassion and energy to listen to each other. They count on us to keep our struggles separate, because they can handle them one at a time, especially if they can convince us that we are competitors of each other. Competitors for funding, don't ever leave out funding, competitors for media attention, competitors for social media clicks. They count on us seeing each other as each other's competitors. But what is brilliant about what you're doing here is you're saying, let's all learn from each other. Let's all realize that we are smarter if somebody else makes us smarter, that our struggles depend on other people's struggles getting support. But that's hard to do when you feel as though you're under such stress. You feel as though you're not going to make the next budget. You feel as though nobody pays attention to you. So let's give each other strategies for how to, when you feel strung out and you feel isolated, not to let that dampen your curiosity about other people's struggles. But we're going to have to share these strategies, right? We're not smart enough to think of it ourselves, and we're not smart enough to resist the temptations to focus on our own channeled, seemingly impossible effort. We're not smart enough by ourselves. So that's why the food is here, everybody, right? I mean, let's be serious here.
And the booze.
Yes, any source of energy, right? And laughter and hugs, but knowledge. Share the knowledge. Come away from tonight, but come away from tomorrow morning and come away from tomorrow afternoon and the same on Friday, thinking, oh, I didn't know that there was that organization. And that have written down how to stay in touch with them.
I think that's beautiful advice. And there's so much learning in this room and so many opportunities to learn. I'm wondering, from Toni and Margo's standpoint, if we're going to be thinking collectively over the next couple of days together about building a future that is more peaceful, that is focused on dismantling war and militarism in its multiple manifestations, and I always think of it as all of its tentacles and the way that it affects our lives in so many different ways. What should we really be focused on, and what should be part of that vision and part of that work?
Gosh, I want to say everything, but exactly as Cynthia said, no one person can do everything. I think one of the things, as someone who is in international studies nominally, which people often think it's just international relations. There's a tendency to focus on those things that are outside of the state. But I think if we're really concerned with feminist peace, we need to look in the everyday, right? And if we look in the everyday, then we'll know that, you know, what we're doing towards feminist peace is right around us, whether it's the organizations here, just in Denver. You don't need to go to New York or Washington, D.C. or The Hague to think about feminist peace. And I think that this is something that I'm trying to reflect a bit more now, because someone who's been trained of always doing the international. So whether you're thinking about reproductive rights, you need to be able to think about how that links to peace as well, right? I mean, I think, for example, let's take COVID as a scenario, for example. For almost 2.5 years, the primary concern was finding a vaccine, trying not to get infected. And I think that could easily be the mainstream story of the COVID times. But it was also a time where we saw a decrease of violent conflict in Africa. But it was also a time where we saw increase of intimate partner violence globally, including in Africa. You cannot separate those two things, in as much as you cannot separate it from COVID itself, who provides care during that period. Thinking about the global political economy and the ways in which it's designed to sort of reproduce this masculinized hegemonies. So when we're thinking about feminist peace, I think it's really important that actually we think beyond those spaces of violent conflict, which again, people in my field, myself included, tends to think about. We need to think about the sort of internal, external dynamics as being sort of a part of this continuum. Because in a way, when I sort of think, for example, about those countries that do feminist foreign policy, they have used their ability to sort of focus on the external as an alibi to get away with the awful things they do internally across all of the states. So much so that, you know, I was having a conversation earlier today, and I said, you know, if you look at what's happening right now in Germany since October 7, it's very difficult to believe that this is supposed to be a bastion of democracy of some sort. And yet, to my mind, at least in the different engagements I've had, at least in terms of the state, they do not see any conflict with their articulation of feminist foreign policy, which talks about racism, colonialism, even mentions reparations and land rights a few times, with what it is that they're doing to women, LGBTQ, and people of color within Germany. But what's also interesting is that it didn't just start October 7. So they've done all of this, had feminist foreign policy, talked about reparation and land rights, but they don't really see any conflict there. So I think, you know, really long answer to your question. If you want to really do something about feminist peace, we need to sort of always think about the sort of duality between that internal and external. And I say that, of course, coming from the more international studies academic perspective.
I appreciate that so much, Toni. I think it's right on.
So I would back it up a little bit. I think, you know, there's a lot of knowledge out there, lots of information, you know, et cetera, and you can find knowledge about everything from so many different perspectives, right? I think what we lack is real understanding. Right? So what's the difference between not knowing and understanding? Knowing is you have information. You know, after 200 days of Israeli attacks, there are 35,000, et cetera, et cetera. You have information. Knowledge is what you take in that information in such a way that it becomes acts of conscience. That's different from just, the statistics. So that's one thing. And we're very quick usually to just react and do and figure out what to do, get the quick analysis, do it, and we often end up in a rut. We keep going around in the similar circles. So what kinds of questions should we be asking ourselves so that we can get a deeper understanding? For example, right, how does power, people in power, constitute and reconstitute itself in such a way that it maintains its hegemonic power, where people agree, oh yeah, this is in our interest, right? How does that happen? Time and again, thinking of not learning lessons, right? How does that happen? And what must we understand about that, right? The constitution and reconstitution of power. Another example of a question that I've been thinking about is, the elites of the world, and you can't talk about militarization without talking about capitalism, obviously, even though the C word hasn't been used here yet, that they're inextricably linked, right? So how do we understand the strongest, most powerful, the best resourced, the most secure, in a sense of having the tightest formation? The biggest solidarity movement is the movement of the elites, right? They will sell their own people down the drain under nationalism, religion, etc., right? And here, some of us are following this flag and this other flag, etc., right? So how must we think about the formation and maintenance of elites, right? The ways in which nationalism, religion, all these things, even feminism, gets deployed in the interests of the state and capital accumulation, right? What must we understand about that in this particular moment? It's made manifest so many times, as Cynthia and others have said, this is not new, but it's coming in a particular way, and it's involving particular participants, right? So you see an African-American woman at the UN talking about why the US is abstaining, and the convoluted thinking, right? The ways in which feminists have become state feminists, where they are doing the work of the state and the elite saying, see, we have a woman doing this and that, they're in decision making. So for me, one of the other questions is, how do we go beyond the bodies into the real politics and interests of people within our movements and people who we can be in relationship with, right? And for me, this moment is one of those historic moments where we can go in different directions. In recent history, 9/11 was one, right? The pandemic was another. This is a third one, right? Where we are pressed to think about which paradigm, which direction do we need to be going, like deep questions about what are our values, what are our principles, what are the visions that we're going to be going for, right? The deep questions, right? And included in that is, who must we become, people like ourselves, to live in the utopia that we absolutely are going to create? Cynthia and I may not see it, right? That we're going to create, right? Who must we become so that we don't end up recreating the same mess that we just changed, right? Think of all the feminist academic departments, ethnic studies department, feminist organizations, decolonized nations that have ended up recreating the same dynamics, same power plays, right? And so the work isn't just doing the tactical work, right? But for me, it is really thinking about how do we build relationships so that we can not necessarily share the final goal outcome specifics, but these spaces, I think, are very useful for us to think about what do we actually believe, right? What are the principles that, not what we're willing to die for, but what we are willing to live every single day of our lives for, right? What are we for, right? And what about love? Right. We're not supposed to use the L word in academic settings.
Oh, we can't.
But anyway, so that's what I think the work of the moment is. And at the same time, we do have to try to stop the killing. It's not either or, it's a both and moment. And this is what I love about this moment. I think it's an amazing time to be alive because of all the things that are going and because of, you know, folks like ourselves with all our contradictions.
Margo, you have an article from a few years ago. It's an interview on the radical possibilities of leading with love. And that was during the pandemic, for me personally, one of the most formative things I'd ever read and continue to refer to, because you grounded us in that love ethic, which isn't something that is a superficial, you know, thing that doesn't belong in political spaces. It is extremely powerful, right? And I'm so glad that you brought that into this conversation here, because if we're genuinely asking this question, which is what I want to turn to you now and ask, of if we're serious about building this feminist piece, what must these deep questions look like? You're, Cynthia, the queen of questions, of feminist questions.
No queens. No princesses, no queens.
Okay. But these questions that
No
you've
tiaras.
invited us to ask for for so long, invite us to think deeply about the topics that Margo just raised for us. And so may I turn the question to you and all of you on the stage here with me to ask what commitments, what politics must be at the center of the work we tried to do together so that we can orient our vision in a way that allows us to not undermine ourselves, to defeat ourselves before we've really been able to move forward together, right? What commitments should we be making today to be able to build a feminist peace, a world of justice, a world of more liberation for all?
I can tell you what I spend a lot of time being curious about. That, right. Shrink the question. That's always the strategy. Right? Bring it down to your own, you know, mortal size. But honestly, I think one of the reasons that I spend a lot of time thinking and wondering and thinking and trying to keep track of patriarchal militarism. And I say patriarchal, not just masculinized militarism, because a lot of people who are attracted to militarized ways of solving things are, in fact, women, right? And so why I spend a lot of time thinking about patriarchal militarism is because militarism I've found, and I'm continuing to find, is so sneaky. It is so able to work like mercury into the smallest spaces of one's mind. So when I look at what's happening at Columbia University right now, I want to know about the militarization of university trustees' minds, right? And the reason I think about this, now this is this may be particularly American depending on the structures of, and Toni and I were talking about this earlier, but the structures of universities in every country. So you have to, if you are from the US and you're interested in how universities either give up their democratic space or never had their democratic space or are having their democratic space threatened, be sure and ask how those universities are run and how they are financed, right? In the US, one of the things that really strikes me is why trustees, some trustees of some universities, so you'd have to do a patriarchal, militarized audit of Denver, right? I mean, really, because I don't know. But you'd also have to do it at Columbia, and you'd have to ask why Columbia is not on NYU, and why NYU so far is not Brooklyn College. You'd have to ask these questions. But one of the things that's really becoming quite notable is that trustees are the ones, as many of you know, who choose college presidents. Why do some trustees at some universities think that people who have no clue how 19-year-olds think and love are the perfect people to be presidents of their university? Why? I mean, really, why? That's not rhetorical. I mean, why? Right? So I want a thinking of the USC president, of the USC trustees, and of the Columbia University current trustees, which, because Toni knows the history of the current president of Columbia. She was chosen precisely because of what she did at LSE. She was chosen precisely because she comes out of the World Bank world. She was chosen because the trustees thought that that would make a safe and solvent and prestigious, that matters to trustees. They want to be trustees of prestigious places. That's why they chose her. She did not choose herself. I don't mean to let her off the hook, but she did not choose herself. She was chosen by members of the Board of Trustees and not by all of them, by the way. Trustees all have inner circles and outer circles. And some trustees are much more influential than others. And that can change over time depending on to what extent large donors become active on trustee boards. And you have to ask. But they chose her because she would go to a militarized solution for security. I don't mean that they asked her, but maybe they did, actually. I mean, really, thinking ahead and thinking what happens at universities, that maybe, did they ask her in the interviews? Did they ask the other candidates? I don't know who the other top candidates were. Did they ask them, if you have encampments or student protests at Columbia, will you hesitate to call in the New York police? Maybe this was part of the interview, or maybe they guessed from her own track record so far that she would not hesitate. The other thing is that current members of boards of trustees of some universities, but not all, care about the intimidating behavior of the members of the, I'm not on the faculty here. I can say the R word. I mean, it matters now. The Republicans in the House of Representatives who set out to intimidate 3 women college presidents. They set out to intimidate them, and they did. And other presidents who weren't there because they were out of the country, including Columbia, watched. And what lessons did they draw from how to escape or slide under or move around the deliberate intimidation by the members of the Republican House caucus. And she took a lesson from it. Now, you can never satisfy. This is why I'm not going to be invited back to Denver. But really, you have to decide if somebody is trying to intimidate you. You have to decide whether you think you can satisfy them. And almost never can you satisfy an intimidator, because they're not out for making you just do something. They're out to control you. And this is a college president who decided that she could satisfy the intimidators and also meet the expectations of her own university trustees, who are really the only people who control presidents. So the workings of militarization are very sneaky, and they're mostly in our heads. And that kind of militarization means that you actually think that highly militarized police people, mainly men, but not only, in fact, can help you solve your problem. That's in a head that is looking for solutions. Now, there's also the militarization of police people, particularly policemen, who think what gives them a sense of pride in their policing. And that has to do with their trainers. And this is the militarization of police trainers at police academies, which are multiple across the country. I don't know who trains the Colorado police or the Denver police or the Boulder police, but my guess is they all went to the same police academy. And what has been revealed is that police academies began changing the way they trained police. This is the militarization of the policeman's mind. They began changing the way they trained police at police academies because they adopted a new manual written by a particular police trainer. And this was, my friends who study this say, who are at the University of Western Kentucky, by the way, one of the most savvy, critical police studies programs, University of Western Kentucky. And they had a couple of us out there, but they were the ones who taught us. And what they said is that, I'm going to get, so I don't have a date. It's going to be something like the late 80s, early 90s. They adopted, many police academy trainers adopted a police manual that framed police training this way. Now remember, you have mostly young men who are being trained, and they're being trained in the world. And what this new manual of training, this new framing of police was, you are under siege, young men. You are under siege. Now imagine if you get trained to think that you're going into a profession, a career, good pension, that frames you as under siege. That is not just a seed, it is a major seed for militarizing your whole sense of yourself.
And can I just add something to what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Go for it. Right. I'm on a rant.
Under siege, particularly by particular peoples of color, right? This under siege-ness is absolutely raced. It's ethnicized. You know, it's anti-Muslim, anti-people of color. So it's not just a general, under siege, right? You don't see these white police officers going after their white January 6th people, for example. Like, look what happened. So, militarism is absolutely patriarchal, masculinist, and it's absolutely ethnicized and raced and nationed and, religion, right? And I want to just pick up on something. Cynthia, you used the word militarization several times, and I found Catherine Lutz's work on militarization really, really helpful to talk about militarization as a process. It's not just a thing, like love isn't just a thing, you got to do it. Anyway, she talks about militarization as the contradictory and tense social process in which civil society organizes itself for the production of violence. And this is what we've been talking about. This process involves an intensification of the labor and resources allocated to the military purposes, including the shaping of other institutions in synchrony with military goals. So I think about the police, the prison industrial complex, the private security guards, as all part of militarization. And we see it increasingly, and we see it in particular locations. You know which ones. Right. Militarization is simultaneously a discursive process involving a shift in general societal beliefs and values in ways necessary to legitimate the use of force, the organization of large standing armies and their leaders, the police under siege, right, and the higher taxes or tribute used to pay for them. Christine mentioned over $1 trillion, right? Over $2 billion a day of US spending only, right? Think about the global spending. In every country, the military spending has increased, especially in the last couple of years. Militarization is intimately connected to the less visible deformation of human potentials into the hierarchies of race, class, gender, and sexuality, and to the shaping of national histories in ways that glorify the legitimate military action. And that legitimation we're seeing on college campuses. People are saying, oh yeah, that's the way to go, although many people are opposing it at the same time, right? And so what's happening on college campuses, I think it's important to see it developmentally. It didn't just pop up, poof, The other thing, preparation for war, taking it outside the US context, is there's something called RIMPAC, right? Which is different countries. I think there's something like 26 countries going to Hawaii to practice military drills, right? And those countries include Israel, Austria, and little tiny countries like Guatemala, not to mention Korea, Japan, etc., right? So this kind of militarization and military practice is ongoing. We don't hear about RIMPAC. We hear about college campuses. Why not? Right? And one of the important questions for us to think about is, what does it mean for us in this room to be connected to the US state in all the ways we are? Does it mean that we don't have to see RIMPAC unless you, of course, you live in Hawaii? And you can be connected to those other countries and still not know about RIMPAC, right? Like many people here don't know about RIMPAC and other kinds of practices, right? So please, please, please think about this as a time of continuities, right? Heightened, for sure, more dramatic probably than ever, but maybe in a particular historic context, it looked just as dramatic as it does now, right? Militarization, it's a whole thing. It's not just, it's the ways, you talked about it as sneaky. It's the ways that we've been led to believe this is the way to go, basically, in all the ways, and that we are rewarded for believing that. We get to continue to be college presidents, or we get to continue to remain on the faculty. We keep, getting to have our NGO funded, right? There are all these different ways we consent. And so for us, let's say as a feminist peace movement, internationalist, feminist, whatever you want to call it, what must be our red lines? Right? Where's the line we're not going to cross and we're going to stand together? So sorry, I'm just kind of...
No, this is great.
It's wonderful because also tomorrow we'll have 2 panels looking at at militarization and militarism as it shapes different contexts outside of the United States, as well as how it shapes so many of from everything from borders to the environment to our carceral systems to policing logics, all of the ways that militarism and US militarism also affects so many things here in our lives in the United States. I want to make sure that we have a chance for everybody to ask questions of these remarkable panelists. And so can we have we have a microphone and we'll be running it around. And as you think of your questions, I encourage you all to kind of take a moment to think of questions you'd like to ask. I'm also going to take Chair's prerogative and run over our allotted time a little bit because we got started a few minutes late. But just to kind of wrap up kind of this part of the conversation, I'll invite you to add anything else that reacts to anything that anyone on the panel has already said.
Well, I think we all had the same idea about, to answer your question, commitment to anti-militarism. So I sort of think of anti-militarism as an ideology, and is in that way that I think it's sneaky. Because actually, increasingly, I've moved towards the concept of martial politics over militarization. Often we see militarization in its heightened state, so, the trainings, the invasion of campuses. But it's actually there in our everyday, and it's actually when we're looking at the spaces that are often marginalized and minoritized, we find that those things that we're noticing in its heightened forms happens in the everyday in a lot of those spaces. So, I found it really interesting about the training changing in the 1980s and the 1990s, when actually a lot of the practices of policing goes back all the way to slavery, to colonialism. So when I sort of think about the fact that in the US, in the UK, we're critiquing how policing is being done within the space, and yet a lot of the same civil society organizations advocate for security sector reform, for training that is engaged by the same militaries and police, but over there. So when we're thinking about commitments and sort of red lines, I think we need to question what we consider to be the status quo here. When I talk about here, I mean in our particular spaces of privilege, so that can also be literally anywhere else in the world. I think we have to pay attention to the insidious ways in which coloniality persists, particularly of the mind, but also in terms of what it is that we know, and I think Margo spoke very clearly about that. And finally, I think as feminists, we should never shy from always being committed to performing a power analysis wherever we are. It seems like a really silly thing to want to do when we're talking about really urgent matters of life and death. But I think we need to consistently question who has power and how that power is being enacted, really.
Mm-hmm.
Hear, hear.
So as my closing comment, I'd like to share with you sections from our, the International Women's Network Against Militarism. We had our last meeting in 2023 in the Philippines, and we came up with what we call a feminist vision of genuine security in the culture of life. Since we met started in 1997, we've been really thinking about what is genuine security. And over the years, we've learned, and this is where we've come to. First part of it is that we envisage the following ways to realize our vision of transforming the prevailing culture of killing into a culture of life. Promoting our cultures of living to, one, ensure the environment can sustain life and respect human dignity. Creating feminist social systems to meet people's basic needs and livelihoods, prevent avoidable harm, and organize society so all will thrive. Engaging, educating, and nurturing people, organizations, and movements to understand and use the idea of genuine security to ensure people's sovereignty and self-determination.
Thank you. I mean, I think that's a beautiful framework to be able to really bring into this space, into these conversations. I want to open it up to folks in the audience. Go ahead and, if you have questions.
Marie, can you just hold your question for a moment? And what are you feeling? What are you feeling right now after you've heard all of us speaking and you've been talking among yourselves before this? What are you feeling? What are your reactions? What is your body telling you? Right? What's your red line? What are your values you're willing to live for? Like, just check in with yourself, and then let's take questions. I'm sort of being bossy here. You know, I'm an older sister. What can I say?
Oh, you can always be bossy. I think that's a beautiful question to ask and to invite folks to just take a pause. I think it's an invitation also to keep finding those spaces for pause over the next couple of days. There are incredible human beings in this room, and I'm honored to be able to sit here with all of you, and I want to invite you to think about what you would like to ask, what you would like to bring into this space. Christine, let's start with you, and then let's go over here.
Kind of a response to your question, Margo. And thank you all. You've all been my teachers, and I have taken all the teachings and tried to live my life according to these principles. And it's hard. And Toni, I mean, to your point, it still feels like all the knowledge, all the networks, all the movements that we've built, and yet we're still at this place where it's more militarization, where the US is still spending masses, and now there's a new enemy. There's China, there's still Russia, North Korea, Iran. Like, we will continue to find more people to vilify and to make enemies. And it's not to say that they're not authoritarian places that need, but the way that the US aggression keeps pushing and forcing reaction. So we're in this constant cycle of aggression, reaction. Where are the places of inspiration? Where are the places? I mean, we don't have a Costa Rica anymore that doesn't have a military anymore. Where are the places of hope? I mean, we saw the Philippines kick out the US military, and now we're back to 9 military bases in the Philippines. Like, this thing about the reaction against feminism, Toni, that you were talking about, like, is this a moment? Is this a moment where we're seeing massive militarization, which in its physical manifestation is patriarchy, is masculinity, is violence, and yet, like, more and more feminists are born. We have more and more generations of feminists. Is there a relationship? So I guess, yeah, what is use? I just want to delve further into that. And also, where are the places of hope that we can kind of hold on to? That I guess it's sort of like middle-aged brain. But just that it's not a linear thing, but that there's actually like these little pockets, and we're like spores, and we're just about to emerge into this powerful revolution. Thanks, Shannon.
No, Christine and I had lunch together. We solved everything. Well, I will pick up. To say this, that it is not linear. And one should never imagine that whatever success one does have is automatically sustained. That you really, I mean, we talk about sustainability, but patriarchy has really learned the sustainability lesson. And that sustainability by itself is not good. It depends what you're sustaining. And so that what it means that we all, is it me? At a restaurant, this means you order the second glass of wine, I think, right? But I think one of the lessons we've all taught each other, which is a really hard lesson, I think, because you're tired. When you've had a success, is you then have to stay organized. You have to stay mobilized. You have to stay attentive. You can't go back to your already demanding private life. You have to stay attentive and organized and in solidarity, because to win some small victory requires maintenance. And maintenance requires attention. And attention means you've got to bring along the next generation to be attentive. And I think it's been a very hard thing to learn. And a lot of the countries that we've all been talking about today, they have remarkable, I mean, think about Sudanese feminists, right? You know that there is, you can go online, there is a Sudanese feminist reading list. Just put those words together now. Sudanese feminist reading list. And it's just Sudanese feminists made up this reading list about Sudanese feminism so that one can understand what they achieved, right? In the last 10 years. What they achieved. But how hard it is, that's why there's now a civil war in Sudan, how hard it has been to sustain it. So I guess one of the things that I've taken away from all our tutoring, including by you, is that you cannot demobilize too soon. It has to be a way of life. It can't be, well, I can give this much attention for these 3 years, but then, really, I have elderly parents, or I have, young kids, or I have neighbors who I have to help. I've got to kind of demobilize. And it turns out if you demobilize, you better have mobilized somebody else to take your place.
That's a beautiful pitch for our intergenerational movement building breakout group tomorrow, where we will convene young feminist activists from around the world who are here with some elders that can share that wisdom and share that knowledge. And
but let's not always imagine that it's people that are grayer who are mobilizing the people who are not so gray. It's sometimes the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
How many parents have been politicized and mobilized by their kids, right? So, let's watch the double ageism.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Toni, would you like to pick up on this question of where we're finding hope?
Right.
Or you, Margo?
Yeah, so I mean, When you spoke earlier, Christine, someone who I always quote as saying feminist work is hard is actually Cynthia in almost every context. You know? And it's literally how I end my modules. You know, it is hard, but you have to keep going. But for me, where I find it is in community and in solidarity. It's here, having this conversation. And I think it can be really difficult to remember that actually this space of learning is also a space of hope, because we're always talking about everything else that is wrong. You know, to go back to the example of Sudan, one of the really fascinating things about what's happened in Sudan in the last 10 years is, whereas you see trends wherein patriarchal militarism emerges as a backlash to feminism, in Sudan, over the last decade, feminism is what has been the backlash to this patriarchal militarism. I was talking to a Sudanese feminist yesterday, and she was saying, you know, she's thinking about projects around, you know, the social dynamics in Sudan, and, you know, thinking about how to get the message out there that right now, a lot of the conversations that are happening around Sudan, I mean, you know, right now, the United States and Qatar, I think, are supposed to be the guarantors of peace in Sudan. You know, good luck with that. And you know, so she was telling me about, you know, how the work that they're doing is to try to really articulate why all the sort of mainstream peace negotiations and conversations is helping is just giving men with guns more and more power, and invariably more guns. And yet, they still keep doing the work. And the fact that they're doing that work, and they're sharing that work with us and helping me think about, you know, my first world problems and often non-issues, but also really motivating me to keep going. I think that those are the spaces of hope, yeah. And you know, I mean, hope and love, going back to Margo's point, you know.
Hope and love,
radical love,
absolutely.
really
Yeah.
important.
I would invite Margo, or what I would love to do, because we're running a little late on time, is can I invite maybe 3 questions from the audience? And we'll ask them all at once, and then we'll give everyone on the panel a chance to say some thoughts.
And then there have to be questions. You know, if you have light to shed it.
Yeah. But also we've got a couple days together. So there's also going to be a lot of chance for more conversations. This is just to get the juices flowing. So I had said Hillary, and then here in front, and then let's go Sheila in the back.
Hillary.
Lovely. Thank you, and thank you all so much. This has been so incredibly heartening and has left me with such a sense of belonging and optimism. And so my question, I think, is sort of the personal is political inverse of Christine's. To be engaged in this work as a scholar, as an activist, as a human living in this world can be so heavy and so demoralizing, and we carry with us, you know, that grief and anger and agony about the state of the world, and we have to immerse ourselves in it. But this is a panel of just iconic and vibrant and joyful people. Okay, 3 or 4, we've rounded up. But I'm just curious, what is it that gives you joy on a daily basis? Not just hope for the future, but joy in this moment. Thank you.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much for all of your words, for all of your thoughts and ideologies. It feels really amazing to be in a safe space like that. My name is Yasmina. I'm originally from Morocco, but I'm based in Puerto Rico. And what you mentioned, Margo, about Hawaii, Puerto Rico, also the island of Vieques was used as a military base by the Navy for bombing purposes. So I did some investigation there. And I saw the real life impacts that it has on biodiversity loss, but also on the population with high rates of cancer. And, you know, coming from global majority countries and doing this work, we understand as young people that all systems of oppression are interconnected, from capitalism to the patriarchy to neocolonialism to militarism. And sometimes when we really want to engage within high-level spaces, with decision makers, with policy makers, and we're just tokenized. We're treated like second-class citizens. We're treated as we're not the experts. That's why I really appreciated when you said intergenerational partnership and dialogue is a two-way thing. So my question is, how can we come together and dismantle all of these systems of oppression? Because at times it feels like almost impossible.
Whew. One of those small questions, yeah. It was beautiful, beautiful. In the back. Our last question for tonight.
This is just awesome. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed the session, the food and everything. But I come from a highly patriarchal background. I come from Africa, and specifically Kenya. The background in which men and boys control the space is just crazy. How can we therefore transfer the feminist approaches to peace building, and what exactly are we therefore doing in terms of putting the roles of men and boys in the space of feminist peace movement? Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'd like to open it up.
Well, I'll talk about joy. So, I don't know, 6 months ago, some group asked me if I would, they were asking a whole bunch of people, and I was one, if I would take a photograph that they were creating some sort of website, I think, that shows peace. And I thought, it's where I go to run and jog every day. And I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and there's a wonderful park that's been created over the last 20 years. And I do my little run and jog thing. And, but this is justice. This park was built right next to where high-rise public housing was built to be out of sight. And now they are the most accessible to the best park in Cambridge, right? Which wasn't what was intended, right? But what that also means is the soccer is fabulous because it's mainly Horn of Africa new immigrants from Somalia and from Ethiopia and Eritrea. So the soccer is just a joy, right? But it also means that it is such a safe space because it is mainly the residents of these high-rise social housing new immigrants who use it. So if you want to use the best park in Cambridge, you will become appreciators of Horn of Africa soccer skill, right? But it also means that kids come with their parents to learn how to ride bikes. It means that all different configurations of friends walk together and do a little birding, you know. And it is when I had to take a photograph, I went and took a photograph of a father teaching his daughter how to kick a soccer ball with this whole great game going on behind you. And I thought, that's peace. It also made me laugh.
Yeah. Thank you, Cynthia.
I can also take the joy question because I think it links back to the question about patriarchy in Africa. For me, the thing that brings me the most joy is feminist friendships, which sounds really corny to say here. But honestly, because in a way, like, joy and energy for me is quite wrapped up in one, and that's the thing that brings me energy. Last week, I was in Nairobi with a bunch of feminists from across the continent where we're trying to, solve all the problems of the world, but of course, starting from our own African feminist perspective. And it was a very draining 2.5 days, but probably also one of the best times of my life ever. And I think, to go back to the question, clearly identified that patriarchy, it's quite interesting living, in the UK, that our concerns around patriarchy in terms of the everyday are slightly different from any other country, really. So being in that space where we can actually share the different ways in which it manifests is really useful. But one of the things you also then find is actually it's not that different. It might sort of come out in sort of slightly different ways, but the fundamentals are still there. And I think that what I found really, part of what made the 2.5 days fantastic was we laughed a lot. We laughed a lot at, someone told me a story about a professor, a feminist professor at the African Union who just talked about feminism and gender. And then a guy got up and said, "Oh, thank you, my beautiful sister." And she said, "I'm sorry. Were you not listening to what I was saying?" And I thought, I should be taking notes. This is what I should do in staff committee meetings, where I'm sure a lot of us have experienced that, where you say something and it's all like, "Oh, we always knew you were gonna say that." And they think they're being nice and listening to you, and it's like the most condescending thing. And so that's, again, another example of how these things do manifest themselves in slightly different ways in your context, but actually there's a lot of similarities, and that's why I value the feminist friendships, because it's there that, solidarity is really present.
Okay. Margo, thank you.
Feminist friendships, I agree. I want to tell a quick story. When I started my activism in my 20s and a little bit later joined the Combahee River Collective, I got involved in activism because I felt there was no one place where I belonged. I'm mixed race, Japanese, African American, et cetera. When I came out as a lesbian, it's like, oh my goodness, there's no place, right? And so I really thought, I want to be part of helping to create places for people like me who have, quote, nowhere to belong to according to existing categories. So that's how I got really motivated, and the rest is history about my activism. In the last 5 years, I'm going to be 75 in November. In the last 5 years, okay, this is my life, I'm here. I've come to realize that, that I do activism, I'm involved because I love people and I love life. And that's what inspires me. And people who know me hear me say this all the time. I love life and I love people. And the other thing is, just to refer to the other question, is, the states, whichever party you like, whatever, Republican, Democrats, to me, they're not very different. All the formations and institutions that have been officially formed, international law, international, et cetera, they've all failed us. And we see that all bets are off. In this moment, we see it, right? And so I want to remind us the importance of transnational feminist solidarity, and maybe that's a theme that we can explore. What would be the guiding principles and values around that? And to quote June Jordan, when she was referring to the South African women's movement, she said, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." And I want us always, always to remember that, and thinking about us, how we grow together and how we, call in. Forget this call out stuff, right? How do we call in each other in such a way that we can all love ourselves and loving each other into becoming the kinds of people we need to become to really live in the utopia that we're going to create. Right? We're going to do that, right?
Yes.
That's it. That's DJ More Love and Joy coming up.
You're up next. That's right. That's what's happening. I cannot thank you all enough. And I just want to, Margo, you summarized this conversation better than I ever could have. But I just want to pull forward and some themes that came out of the conversation to carry us into tomorrow. Themes around relationships. It sounded like that cut through so much of what we talked about. This idea of love grounding our politics, this commitment to praxis and to the work that doesn't start or stop on a short delineated time frame, but rather stretches back and forward, and that we are all a part of. And I just want to, bring some of that into the conversations to frame our next panels starting tomorrow, and to just invite you all back in the morning. To invite you all back at 9 a.m. in this room. Please join us. We have a wonderful program planned for you tomorrow. Plenaries, breakout groups, more plenaries, musical performances, fantastic films. And I am so looking forward to having a time to deepen these conversations. And so for now, DJ, you are up. More love and joy. Thank you, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Please eat and help yourselves and be in community with one another.
Thank you.